So I know it's quiet. It's probably because you all want to be out in the sunshine, but we are expecting a few. But I think I'm sort of I like starting on time. So I think we'll start on time, and hopefully more people will be coming in. So to begin with, I'm Bill Booth, Reverend Bill Booth, and I'm the minister at Trinity Memorial United Church. And beside me is Max, who will introduce himself in a moment. And we're really glad you've come on here for this Affirming Ministry Learning event. And I'll introduce you to our keynote speaker. Is that that appropriate thing to say, Pam, in a minute? But let us begin as we meet together to acknowledge, we wish to acknowledge the land in which we work and play and live here in Abbotsford. And that land is the unceded territory of the Stolo First Nations, who have been on this land for millennia, and their territory or their lands that they've nurtured and cared for and lived on and have been nurtured and cared for themselves by the land goes from the other side of Langley up the canyon to Yale. It is our hope and prayer that there will be true reconciliation amongst the First Nations people and the main culture of which we are members. So we remember and acknowledge those who have been blessed by this land and who have blessed this land. We wish to also acknowledge another important aspect of our time together is, of course, what we're here for, which is to enrich our affirming ministry, our accepting, welcoming ministry. So today we light our rainbow candle to remind us that there's still work to do in our welcoming of the LGBTQ2S plus community into the family of God, into our churches, into our lives, into our hearts. And that's what we're here for today, to do that work. We also light, gonna get you up there again.
Yes, no problem.
We also light our Christ candle to remind us that we do this work because we are called by the light of God, and the light of Christ shines into our lives and into the world, bringing hope and joy to all. So I just want to let you know what we're going to be doing today. Once we finish these introductions, Pam is going to respond to some of our pre-written questions we've sent. And at some point, you'll be given an opportunity for some quick question and answers, just in relationship to the things Pam have said. And then we'll go into small breakout groups and allow you to have some conversation and look for you to identify a few steps that might be important in your context, whether it's here, this church, or one of the other churches. This event is sponsored, is that the right word? Sponsored or supported or encouraged by the Affirming Ministries here at Trinity Memorial, at St. Andrews, and at Gladwin Heights. So we're glad to have Max here, sort of the lead hand with the Affirming Ministry here at Trinity Memorial. Patricia is here from Gladwin Heights and brings an interest for her affirming ministry there at Gladwin Heights. And I think we're expecting at some point Linda from Mission to be present too. So that's lots. Now, we'd like to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Pam, and Max, you're going to start with that, with a bit of a personal story.
Thank you. Well, my name is Max Arangit-Peterson, and I'm the lead person here at Trinity Memorial. But it brings me back in memories, a good one. When I joined the church, I became a member of Knox United Church in Calgary. And they called me for the position to be the lead person of the Affirming Ministry. I had not idea of nothing. I was trying to figure it out myself who I am. And it was very confusing, but the minister called me, and it's a great lady that helped me in the whole process, Linda Hunter. And one day somebody said, when I was kind of, what do I do now? Call Pam Rocker. She is very active
Dad, the school's looking really
in
good.
Hillside United Church. So I called Pam, that was around 2013, and I said, Pam, I am new. I don't even know much about myself. Please give me a hand. And she gave me so much information and so much support. And in 2 years, we got a very active Affirming ministry in North United. We have 40 LGBTQ plus attending the service. And it was something so remarkable to get the support from the members of the congregation for the ministry and everyone involved. And it was a great experience. But I thank Pam personally because she was the most important person to help me to make something possible, something that I didn't even know myself. So Pam, thank you.
Thank you so much, Max.
So here's I'm going to read Pam's bio, which just helps, and then just one or two things. Pam is an atypical activist. I love that. An atypical activist, award-winning writer, speaker, and musician. Pam has worked for over a decade for the full inclusion of LGBTQ2S+ people in faith communities and beyond. She's chosen as one of the top 40 under 40 in Calgary and one of the top 30 activists in Canada. She's the chair of Broadview magazine and co-host of the Sacred and Profane podcast. She's currently the director of Affirming Connection and speaks and plays across the country. And I am grateful as well for Pam's, when we started our affirming process here at Trinity Memorial, Pam, you sent a really lovely video of encouragement, and it was a great launch for the work we were doing. So, and the final thing to tell you about Pam is she's getting married in June. June 16th, and she tells me underneath the redwoods in California. So how cool is that? Thank you very much for being here, Pam, and we're going to now let Pam speak. If you haven't muted yourself, I invite you to mute yourself so you know, the noise in the background of your rooms or your homes doesn't suddenly take over when Pam is speaking. So thank you very much, and let's go and leave it up to you now, Pam.
Thank you so much, both of you. Max, I don't know if you give me too much credit because you're a pretty tenacious activist yourself, mover and shaker in Calgary and now in BC. So I appreciate even being part of your journey, but you have made so many spaces wherever you go and created a lot of great conversations. So happy to work among you, and thank you, Bill, for including me to be a part of this very meaningful and important conversation. I wanted to share, Bill mentioned that I'm getting married actually on June 16th, so just about a month from now. And we are lucky enough to get married in Big Sur, you know, where all of these ancient redwoods are. And the thing that's really special to me about that, among, you know, marrying the love of my life, obviously, is, you know, we get to be a part of, you know, these pieces of nature that have been around for hundreds of years, to be a witness to something that has not always been celebrated. And yet we know that even in nature and in our spiritual journeys, as we become more open and begin to, you know, see folks and see ourselves more as God sees us, as fully accepted and fully loved for all pieces of who we are, it feels really sacred to get to be in that sacred space, among that, in a space where, you know that you are accepted and loved. And so, yeah, it feels really special. So I wanted to start off with a bit of a story. So I have if you would have asked me 30 years ago, 35 years ago, when I was a little kid, where I would end up, I would have no idea what to tell you. But what I would be able to tell you is something that's still true to me now. And that's because when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I started writing as soon as I could, writing stories. I could not spell, but sometimes you could decipher it. And the very first story that I wrote was just a couple of lines. And it went, I love my mom, I love my baby, I love Jesus, and I love my mom. So that's pretty good. The story has to have a beginning, middle, and end. So I just, did the circular route there. And I did lie because I didn't have a puppy, but that was just, we really wanted one. So I just added that in there. But what I wasn't lying about is that I love my mom and that I love Jesus. And of course, at that age, I didn't have an understanding about the theology. You could have asked me about some stories of Jesus, and I would have probably been able to tell you a few of the stories that I learned on the felt board in my Sunday school room in upstate New York, is where I spent.
So we are going to trust that Pam will come on in a moment, back on, and we have to tell her. So just bear with us. It's she's in California apparently, but we'll tell her that just as she was talking about being in Sunday school in upstate New York, she disappeared. So we'll just maybe a little prayer.
You want me to call here?
Oh, you could call her. Yeah. Max is going to give her a call. All the things, right? So I'm hoping that when Pam does get to talk, she'll talk about, she had a really powerful story about the symbols, where she walked into a church. There she is. She's coming on. Hi, Pam. Connecting.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
We can hear and see you now. We lost you just as you were talking about Sunday school in upstate New York.
Okay. I'm on my phone. For some reason, my computer, maybe it's because we're sort of out in the country a little bit. It was working well before, but if you can hear me and see me, then we've got it. We're good. So, but one thing that I knew to be true about what my parents, taught me at that point, at that age, about Jesus, was this sort of unconditional love, this idea that, outside of my parents, outside of, the love that I felt from, my very close family and relatives that were all around, was that there was something that was sort of a mystery, but that told me that I belonged. And one of the things that helped me, sort of solidify that into, my little spirit at that time was, like I mentioned, we were in upstate New York, and we lived about 2 miles from our nearest neighbor. And so we had all of this forest I don't know if you've ever been to upstate New York. There's lots of beautiful places in BC and in Canada that sort of look like that. But we would have big forests, and there'd be like huge floors of moss. And there was this big clearing that had moss, and we called it the Emerald Forest. And, we would just spend the whole entire day out. We'd pack a little backpack with some snacks. And my mom encouraged us to get out of the house. There were 4 of us. And so, we were able to really enjoy, using our imaginations. And it was out there in that forest that it really became clear to me that I belonged, and that there was that I could never be lost. How could I be lost when even in this vast expanse, I knew that I would never be alone? Now, the thing that was, a shifting point for me was when I started to, grow up and hear a little bit more about the beliefs that were often attached to this life of faith. And as I did that, it became less and less about imagination and about, feeling like I belonged and feeling this closeness with the divine. And it became more and more attached to how can we make sure that other people believe what we believe? How can we make sure that there are a list of rules of do's and don'ts that we all follow, and then we try to keep other people in line too? And this was very different from the life of faith that I had as a child, because it was more about who gets to belong. It was more about, okay, there's literally room enough for everyone. And then it sort of started to become more like a small patch of grass versus an expansive wilderness. Father Gregory Boyle, who works with a lot of former convicts in California, actually, he talks about that we act like the God that we serve. And so if we think that God is exacting and judgmental and tiny spirited, then that's how we're going to be, whether we think it or not. But if our God is expansive and spacious and shows love and reaches out to the margins until they don't exist anymore, then that's the kind of God that we're going to emulate. And I began to realize as I grew up that the kind of God that I was encouraged to emulate was more exacting and judgmental. And I was very confused because I wanted to get along and go along with everything that the community around me was telling me, but it was very confusing. And at the same time, I kind of felt like I was maybe a little bit different from some folks around me. I looked around and I saw their romantic relationships around me, and my parents had a wonderful, loving relationship. But I looked around and I knew that I didn't quite fit, but I wasn't really sure why. And so at the same time, as I was realizing maybe there's more judgment in this belief system than I thought there was, and realizing maybe I'm different from other people, I realized that I needed to get myself in line. And so I spent a large piece of my life trying to hide and squash who I was in very extreme ways often. And I really forgot about this idea of, this very innocent first story that I wrote about loving Jesus, loving this idea of being called to love and serve, and all of the parables that I read and all the stories about Jesus. None of this seemed to really match up, but yet I lived with that cognitive dissonance that some of us can often live with, where we believe, or at least we say we believe in the unconditional love of God, but then what we actually perpetuate in other people doesn't represent that. And so it took me a long time to get from that imaginative faith into a faith that was more open. And the reason why I share this story is because I think often it's easier for us to layer on, even subconsciously, these ideas of exclusion. Even if we're in a progressive community or in a progressive church or around, progressive friends and family, a lot of times from our own sort of backgrounds, there can be sort of these subconscious ideas that maybe everybody doesn't quite belong. And one of the things that really stands out to me from, an ethics class that usually we take in grade 4 or 5 is, they ask kids, who, if there was 5 people in a lifeboat, but only 4 of them could stay on, so one had to go so the other ones could live, who would you kick off, right? And often they say a lawyer, a janitor, a stay-at-home parent, a judge, and a young child, right? And of course, little kids love to pick who they would kick off. That's kind of how it goes. But at the same time, that conversation is actually pretty common among many of us, more than we would like to think. And I think society in many ways encourages us to continue to think that way about other people. And often when we have polarizing conversations around religion, it can, sort of seem like, okay, if other people get to belong, does that mean that we're closer to the edge of the boat, right? I just want to check in and make sure that you can hear me and see me okay.
We can hear you just fine. Your video sort of pauses and goes, but that's fine. We're getting most of it, but we're hearing you just fine.
Okay, perfect. I apologize for that. I'm sorry that it's not behaving, but hopefully you can hear me okay, and we can stick in here. So with that in mind, I just wanted to ground that in some of my own personal story, because I did spend, a quarter century of my life in very strict evangelical churches, in ways that, there was a lot of things that I learned about caring for people and compassion and, different things that I still stick with me. But it was a very much an idea of, we need to sort of secure our position and make sure that we're right. And, so for me, it was a lot of, disentangling from those ideas, even after I came out, to make sure that I didn't continue to do that to others. I wanted to address some of the questions that y'all asked. So I know that you had a gathering a little while ago, and you put together some questions that I think really get to the heart of what we talk about when we talk about affirming. I was having a discussion with a bunch of folks the other day, and they were talking about how sometimes we try to explain what affirming is, but sometimes it's like trying to nail rainbow jello to the wall, right? Because it can have so many different definitions. But I think the question
We'll just wait for her to realize that and come back on.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh, she's back. Good.
So I think their questions really speak to the fact that you get it, right? That you sort of understand what the heart of what affirming is, even though it's kind of hard to, really tap in at times to what that means. So the first thing I sort of, put the questions that you asked in 3 different categories. So to me, I know that you know what PIE Day is, public, intentional, explicit, PIE. And so I sort of organized the questions, even though those categories are porous, I organized the questions sort of around that. So one of the questions that you asked was, how do we publicize our affirming ministries? And this is a great thing.
So when she comes back on, I'll suggest she turns off her video. Maybe that'll help. But it does look like it's not bandwidth so much as it dropping out. So hopefully she'll see soon. You could text her with that. Okay. Just try to talk but turn off the video. We've all learned to be so patient with technology, right?
Hi, folks.
Hi.
Okay. So I came outside.
You might also try just turning off your video and just having the audio, and maybe that'll
okay, work. I will try that. I came outside. I think my LTE, I'm on data right now because our Wi-Fi isn't behaving. So I think it might be a little bit better out here. But Max, can you just give me, I can see you. So can you just give me a wave because you're the only person I can see on my screen. Can you give me a wave if you can't hear me or if anything goes wrong? So right now you can sort of see my picture there, which looks very rock star, a little bit more than me with my, hair sort of in vacation mode right now. So the question that you asked was, how do we publicize our Affirming Ministries? And the first thing I think of is, Bishop Gene Robinson, who was one of the first openly gay priests that was ordained in the Anglican Church. He talked about one of the big mistakes that affirming churches can make is they practice what they preach, but they don't preach what they practice. And I think sometimes I see in the United Church that we can be so kind of shy, or we don't want to emulate the sort of marketing energy that we feel from more, maybe traditional conservative churches. And we don't want to be seen as pushy. But sometimes that means that we aren't often proud enough, or it doesn't necessarily translate to letting people know who we are and what we're about. And so the first thing I would say is, make sure that, for example, on your websites, when people visit your website, would they know who you are? Would they have an understanding of, that you are an affirming ministry? Does it have your affirming statement on there? Maybe even sharing what your process was like, because lots of folks can, slap a rainbow flag or something on their on their website or on their church. But I think having a sort of a deeper explanation of what the affirming process is really important, because when people, are looking for that information, they're really already taking a risk, right? They're really already sort of saying, they might have been hurt, or their family members have been, or they just don't want to be a part of a church again that it discriminates against people. So this affects everybody, not just queer folks and queer identified people, but people in general who, these issues are really important to them. So, consider what kind of story you want to share somewhere on a place where, people can sort of have a passive connection with you. That says, this is what we went through. This was something that was intentional. We took this seriously, and it lets people know that this is something that they can trust in. They can put some of their confidence in knowing that you cared, and that goes a really long way. Also making sure that, obviously having a same-sex marriage policy is required to be an affirming ministry. And so making sure that that's really clear on your website as well, under weddings, right? So, making sure that you have that wording there, because people will be looking for that. And then just making sure, do you have the Affirm United logo on there, or at least a link? That way, if people are curious, what did they even get to be, what are they a part of or whatever, then, they have an idea of what that is. Another key aspect of it is when people walk into your building, and I know this might be a minute, so, but what do they see? What is some of the first things that they see when they walk in? Well, if I were to walk into where Bill and Max are right now, I would see, a lot of rainbow symbols, not least of which Max's suspenders, which make me really happy. But, there would be signs and symbols for me to say, okay, I'm in the inside in this holy, sacred space that often, I do not get recognized, and I don't get recognized in a celebratory way, right? So I think that really, we have to remember how powerful those things are. Whereas we might come in and think of it and, feel joyful or proud of where we are, but that could be a really deeply shifting and radical thing for somebody to see in a sacred space. I would also say, when you advertise affirming events or, different things that people could be invited to be involved in, sometimes, watch for sort of in language, right? We might say, okay, come and register with Susan, or, call Tom, or whatever, right? And we might assume that people know more about our community than they do. So make sure that when you market stuff, even though maybe many of the people who usually attend may be regulars and part of your community, that you put the promotional wording and stuff like that out there, whatever you might have in terms of a bulletin or a digital e-newsletter, to make sure that people know like that they're included too. They don't have to know something about your community in order to come and be a part of it, right? And I would also say, don't wait for the community to come to you. Go and be out there, right? So obviously this includes the Pride Parade or a parade booth, maybe resource fairs, maybe there's some, community organization resource fairs in your area that would be, helpful for you to go to. Give out rainbow buttons, with your church thing on it. Don't be afraid to be in the public square. Don't be afraid to know that when you're in those spaces, you're living out public theology. And that's something that people really do take seriously and it matters to them. Another thing would be, having partnerships with community organizations. Think about theater companies, film festivals, any social justice oriented things that are happening. You might be surprised who might say yes, right, to hosting a film night with you, or having a book fair, or doing a pie fundraiser, right? And so I think reaching out and, you sort of double your reach when you partner with other organizations. That's true for other churches too, but don't be shy to approach other organizations in your community. And, don't be surprised if maybe they haven't worked with you before and they might say, okay, we haven't really heard of a church wanting to support us for whatever reason. Don't take it personally, but explain to them who you are, right? And what you're trying to do. And that gives it a great way to have conversation about it. And even if something doesn't happen at that moment, it might be something that happens down the road. This kind of goes along with it. And somebody asked about what is the power of symbols? And when we talk about this, often we're talking about, when we talk about affirming, we're talking about the rainbow flag. And you may already know this, but I always find it fascinating that when we think about it, we go back to about 1978, when the artist Gilbert Baker, an openly gay man and a drag queen, designed the first rainbow flag. So I love it that a gay drag queen designed the rainbow flag, right? That's how it should be, right? And so basically he revealed later that he was urged by Harvey Milk, who was one of the first openly gay elected officials in San Francisco, actually in the US, to create a symbol of pride for the gay community. And so he, as they were, sort of thinking about what they wanted to do to show pride, he was tasked with, okay, well, what could you create? And he decided to make that symbol a flag because he saw that flags as the most powerful symbol of pride. He later said in an interview when he was asked about this, and he said, our job as gay people was to come out, to be visible, to live in the truth, and to say, to get out of the lie. A flag really fit that mission because that's a way of proclaiming your visibility or saying, this is who I am. So he saw the rainbow as a natural flag from the sky. And so he adopted first 8 colors for the stripes, each color with its own meaning: pink for sexuality, red for life, orange for healing, yellow for sunlight, green for nature, turquoise for art, indigo for harmony, and violet for spirit. And so that shows you that, even beyond the colors and sort of our automatic recognition of what this rainbow might mean, there's a deep history behind it. And so, even if we as queer folks don't necessarily, we don't need to know all the history of everything, but we do know that this symbol means something. It was created to basically say, this is who I am. I can feel pride. My being and myself is as natural as the sky. And when we have those signs and symbols in our communities, it often lets people know that they don't have to wonder. I always say that churches are a great place for wonder, but no one should have to wonder if they belong, right? And so making sure that we sort of eliminate some of the wonder, of the wondering. And symbols, like I said about being public, it's not just for queer folks or those who are interested in connecting with our communities. There are also challenges and encouragement for others, right? If people drive by your community or see this on your website, if they're not affirming, this actually gives them a little bit of a challenge. This goes counter narrative to the dominant voice that often says that in order to be holy, we have to be discriminatory against the LGBTQ community. And so you're providing a different story and a different narrative just by the symbols that you have up. And it also lets others know, people who are, part of the, non-queer community, that this is a place where they could come. And often people who are perhaps, in a category where they may have been ostracized for a different reason, perhaps because, they were in a conservative church and they got divorced, or, maybe they practice another religion, but they also want to be a part of a community and they're interested in, having a pluralistic, experience at church. This also helps them know that if you have gone to the effort of going through this journey of being expansive, then they probably belong too. And so just know that those signs and symbols are, really powerful to more people than we usually think. There's another question around how do we re-energize our affirming ministries? And that's really a really great question because the Affirming Ministry program has been around since the 90s. There are churches that have been affirming for decades. And there have been churches that have been affirming for 1 week. I was just, made a video last week for a church in Calgary that became affirming. And sometimes what happens is we get really excited about the process and we have a great celebration. And then, maybe some of the volunteers that are, were really active, understandably want to take a break or they move and, maybe you get a new minister and all of a sudden, maybe it isn't as apparent as before, or there's a little bit less focus on it. And that happens. It's nothing to feel guilty about or, to sort of stay in that space. It is hard sometimes, especially with something that can still seem a little bit controversial. Sometimes there's still some, even, yes, in affirming churches, there can be some pushback, right? And so I think that, one of the things that I think of is, first give yourself a break, give yourself grace. And what I say is think small, right? It can be really overwhelming to feel like when you sort of look around and, compare yourselves to what might be happening in other churches or, whatever to feel like, well, how can we ever sort of do that? But sort of think about it as sometimes you need your fog lights because you could only go a little bit at a time. Sometimes you need your low beams and sometimes you got your high beams on. You can go really fast, right? So just kind of know that you start from where you start. And choose organic times of the year to ground yourself in rituals and events that could become traditions. So what do I mean by that? So obviously there's Pride, whenever Pride might happen in your area. There's other things that you can ground yourself in, like Trans Day of Visibility, of course, Pi Day, March 14th every year. And, those sorts of things that will give you a sense of grounding that happen every year. So it sort of gives you those spaces to rally around something that's already a part of the broader community. And because many people celebrate at those certain times of year, that gives you more chance for partnerships and opportunities too, to help re-energize what you're doing and give you more outside support as well. And I would also say, if you're looking for people to be on a committee, this might be an opportunity to, specifically ask people if they can be on a committee. Sometimes, but, just putting it out there and saying we need volunteers or whatever, but this might be something that needs some discernment and to really say, who can we invite into this process that would be a meaningful part of continuing this on. And it doesn't always mean that, it's just the LGBTQ plus folks in your community, but allies also who, maybe it's a parent of somebody who is LGBTQ or, a teacher or somebody who's involved in a GSA, right? There might be somebody that who is sort of like sitting back and waiting to be asked to be a part of it. People can always say no, but they can get the invitation and then they have the opportunity to decide if that's the right time for them. Another thing is get speakers in, obviously, which you've done here. don't be afraid to use other resources that help give you a boost as well. I tell you what, the most hardworking people that I know, the hardworking volunteers that I know, are in affirming churches, right? Like I'm gonna just try to put my video on, only because I see that I have quite a few bars, and it's probably more exciting to see my face. So I'm gonna try this. Let's just pray. We'll give it over to Jesus and we'll see if we can do this. So you can see I've been like running my fingers through my hair because I want to be able to create a good experience for you. So, don't be afraid to use other materials, use videos, have movie nights, with queer movies. Don't think that it's up to you to have to create all of your own material, do all of the speaking or all the things on your own. Know that you're not alone, and there's lots of ways for you to be supported. Another question that you asked is, what are the ways that we can connect with the community and especially youth? And that's a question that every church, regardless of whether this has to do with their affirming ministry or not, asks, right? Again, a question that I would say is, can you go into, is there a way that you can, maybe provide space, right? When things are more safe for people to gather, often a really valuable thing that churches have is space, right? And so you have that to offer. So I actually know many churches that offer space to GSAs and QSAs, right? So that's Queer Straight Alliance and Gay Straight Alliance, right? They're clubs that happen inside schools. And sometimes actually they're not allowed to meet at school, or maybe they're in a Catholic school or in a place that isn't a very friendly place for them to be. I know that in St. Albert, Alberta, they have a really amazing GSA. It has over 40 kids come every day, and they meet in the basement of St. Albert United Church, right? And so St. Albert United Church gets, from like 3:30 to 4:30 every day, rambunctious queer and allied kids running around, and they give them soda or whatever, and they have a really amazing time. And how beautiful is this, that there are 40 kids inside of a church knowing that they're not only welcome, but that they're like wanted to be there. That's revolutionary. This is not the reality that most of us live in, right? And so if you're able to host something in those ways, then that is really revolutionary. And so, feel free to reach out to, if there are queer groups or anything that have to do with youth in your area, and say, listen, we have space every Wednesday from this time to this time. That's always open. If you ever want to do an event, or if you ever want to do whatever, talk to us. We want to provide this for you. And again, I think you'll be surprised by, what that might mean to people, and the people who might take you up on that. And that's true for other things too, because if there's, again, I think of like theater companies, and I think of other artsy things where there's a lot of, young adults involved, reach out to them. Not many people are going to reach out to you. And, if they do, then that's wonderful. And maybe they will start to over time. And, some of you who, do have more connections and who have been lucky to create some of those experiences will, already know that that's the truth. But reach out, hold a fundraiser for a local LGBTQ group. Is there a group that for refugees? Is there a group that, runs a food program or housing program for LGBTQ youth? Like, is there something as close to your area as possible that you could sort of choose to rally behind as a community and say, you're important to us? And even if there isn't a more direct partnership for you to have with them, you're able to tell them in a really meaningful way that we care about you, right? And again, this is not about, getting, and I know that this wasn't what the question was asking. It's not about getting youth to come to church. It's about how can we reach folks who are really at the most vulnerable times in their lives and know that there is a place for them. And often, I'm sure people have told you this, even if I wish that we could have a percentage of people, but I know anecdotally I can say a lot if we want to write that down. There's so many people who, they might see a rainbow flag, they might see you in the Pride Parade, they might hear a sermon, that's really affirming. They might experience these things, and it might take them 2 years, 3 years, 7 years to actually engage with you. When I was a part of a church in Calgary, we walked through the Pride Parade and we gave out buttons, and it just had the logo and it had a rainbow background on it. And at one point, many years later, these two young women who were together came to the church, and I could kind of see them, in the back. And I went over to talk to them, and I, asked how they're doing. And I said, well, how did you, they said, oh, this is our first time here. And I was like, great. Well, how did you find out about us? And they said, actually, 7 years ago, your church walked in the Pride Parade and you gave me this button. And we have had that on our kitchen table for 7 years. And a couple times in the last 7 years, we've gotten into the car, we've come and drove by the church, we've even parked, but we haven't come in. Because what we've experienced before is, even when we thought we were welcome, the rug was pulled out from under us. And so it took us this long to come in. And so we have to know that being affirming is the ultimate long game, right? And we talk about that when we say, we're not arriving, it's part of the journey, but that's really true. And that story lets us know that that's true, right? We can't assume that people know who we are. And so having that faithfulness and that continued commitment to it, we were able to welcome them into the community because, we had tried as much as possible to remain faithful to, the public witness that we showed them that day at the Pride Parade. So it just shows you never know who you're going to touch, right? And you never know the time frame in which they might respond to the things that you do. But that's part of what faith is about, is we have to trust and know that the things that we're doing that are faithful will have those fruits. And we may not always see them now or even in this lifetime, but those things are happening. Another thing that somebody asked was identifying what you have to offer the community. And I talked about a building space, and that can be a really important thing. Another thing that you have to offer is political action, right? We've seen that across Canada in municipalities and in provinces. Lots of faith communities, for example, work to ban conversion therapy, right? And we know that it's happening on a federal level slowly, and we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. But municipalities and provinces have said, we're not going to wait for the federal government to do something, because we realize this is affecting people right here and right now. And if we can just, by our public witness, have one less person have to experience something that shames who they are, or that makes them want to feel like they have to self-annihilate, we are going to do that because that matters. And I've seen churches, group together to, contact their city councilors, to show up at city council meetings, to, having rallies, to writing letters, all sorts of different things. And you have that to offer. And I can't tell you, I was part of this campaign in Calgary last year. And I can't tell you how many people contacted me to say, I can't believe that you're wanting to ban conversion therapy. That these churches, they kept kind of checking in, like, wait a minute, you want to ban it, right? Because all that they heard was all of this rhetoric and all these things that was, saying, well, we need to have freedom of religion to be able to, people can decide if they want to change and all that kind of stuff, right? And so they were so shocked. But what a great witness that was for us to be in the public square, and for us to be able to have that experience. And don't underestimate that what you have to offer is a place for people to explore spirituality safely. Again, we're all born with a spiritual yearning, and we're all looking for ways at different points in our lives to work that out in community. And one of the things that, keeps us from feeling like we can do that in community is not only bad experiences, but also, what we usually hear, even from society at large, is let's discuss how much you can be included or not. And there's always a discussion, right? Let's decide if you can do this. Okay, let's decide if you can go this far. Let's decide if you can attend here or work here or, do these sorts of things. And so what you have to offer is something really beautiful. And yes, we shouldn't have to say it because this should be reality. But don't be afraid to say it, because you have something still phenomenally rare to offer and something that people are looking for. And we don't know how they might engage with us. Maybe it's in a way that we won't know. Maybe it's online. We never really know what that might mean, but we know that it matters to people. And we know that even if they have a couple of positive religious voices in their life, that changes the odds of how they might feel about themselves. Are people hearing me okay? Max, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay. So there's a question about what are some of the missteps, and mistakes to avoid as, maybe you're continuing your affirming journey or you're discerning what that might look like for you. One of the things that I see is people sort of say, okay, we're affirming, and now where are all the gay people? Right? We became affirming, and so we thought we were going to be brimming, with lesbians and bisexuals and trans folks, and where is everybody? And I understand that people get excited, and there's like, okay, we've done this journey, and we're so excited, and we want to create a safe place. And I understand that that's actually coming from really good intentions. But what we can't undo just by our own particular journey is a huge history of discrimination and hurt from a religious perspective. And so be patient. The things that we've talked about so far in terms of, going out to the community and doing all of those sorts of things, that helps us remember that it's still about us going out. Right? Yes, it matters what people experience when they come in to, whether it's a Zoom service or, something else. But we also have to remember that, we don't have control over how people experience that invitation. Our job is to give that invitation and to continue to preach what we practice, right? And so, people may not trust instantly, right? It may not be 7 years always, like with the example of those two women that I talked about, but it might take some time. And so have grace with yourself. Don't think that it was for naught, or that, you did something wrong, or, anything like that. It just does take time sometimes. But when you do gain that trust, it really is the most invaluable thing that you can have. Getting a very rare experience of seeing my hair not perfect, so you can appreciate that's my gift to you. Don't get discouraged when there are people in your community who are still naysayers, right? In the best affirming church at the best of times, there are going to be people who think you talk about it too much, you put too many resources behind it, you're not doing it the right way. Why aren't you putting more focuses on this other ministry? This doesn't really apply to me, so I'm not sure why, this is a thing, or I don't really get all the theology behind it. There are going to be folks like that in our communities, right? No matter how long we've been affirming or whatever, that's just human nature. And so don't feel like because those things exist, don't be discouraged by that. Obviously, we don't want people to have a bad experience when they come into our communities. And so we always want to continue to do that internal education and continue to ourselves be on that affirming journey. But try not to get discouraged by that or think that it means something beyond what it does. We all get uncomfortable when there's change, and sometimes we'll still remain a part of the community, but we still might have a huge reticence to it. And there are people who don't really want to be a part of a affirming community, but they are because they have friends there, whatever. And we hope that by continuing to be who we are and do what we do, that they will continue to come along on it. Ask for help. Some people who are going through the affirming process, or who are, struggling to re-energize, they sort of are trying to rally everybody sort of from the inside out. And sometimes that's possible and that works. Sometimes you do need to reach out to another church that's doing affirming stuff, to other people, maybe in different places across the country, it's okay. It's okay that you might need help. It's okay that you might say, hey, maybe we're struggling, or maybe you're having, maybe there are some people in positions of leadership in your church that you feel, are trying to, maybe tamper it down a little bit or something. So feel free to reach out. Most of the time, people who are involved in other ministries will totally get what you're going through, will not judge you for whatever challenges are coming up, and who will have some advice to give you of how they might have navigated it. Or at the worst case scenario, they can say, yeah, that's really hard. You're not alone in it. And sometimes that helps buoy us a little bit into the next thing that we have to do. And also say, there's a balance. When I talked before about how we, define affirming, we sort of get into, exactly what does this mean? And so I try to encourage two things. Have a lens towards intersectionality, because obviously people are bringing all of themselves to the table, right? So if I'm in your community, obviously I'm a gay person, and I'm also female identified, and I have an interesting background with evangelicalism, so I have different things like that. So I'm bringing different parts of my identity all to the table, and so somebody else, especially people of color, are going to come to this journey, and they're going to have different marginalizations that they're also bringing with them. And so know that it doesn't replace one for another, but the work that you're doing towards other things as well is going to also lift up your Affirming Ministries, because we want people to be able to bring all pieces of themselves to the table. And that isn't just about queerness, but it's about all the other diversities and the beautiful things that we bring. It doesn't mean that you can't have your main focus in the core be about gender and sexual diversity, because we know that that's one of the most shamed things in recent history that's happened for queer folks, right? There's no other group of people that the Bible has been used so violently against in the past, few decades. And so we see that, it's really important for that to remain the core. And so we're not seeking to dilute that, but we want to remember all the other tendrils that are attached to that as well. And that we want to make sure that we also are mindful of those things that make the affirming process actually stronger and more exciting and more creative as well. The last few questions that I have are sort of under the heading of explicit that we have. And somebody asked, what are the top 3 things that we need to welcome people into our space? And so, the first thing that I think of is actually that your theology is affirming, right? So, if you're sort of, if that isn't in place, well, that's not going to be very welcoming. And there can be really cool churches, and there are really cool churches that maybe have rainbow flags up and, whatever, and people might be a part of them for a long time and feel like, man, this is a great place for me to be. But as soon as I say, oh yeah, hey, I want to get married here, or, oh, hey, I was thinking about being on the worship team, somebody says, oh, no, well, we don't do that. We're happy you're here, but we don't go that far. And so making sure, I'm not making that assumption about any of you on this call, obviously, but, making sure that at the core, that what you're promising is real, right? And so it's better if you're taking your time and you're sort of getting there to not really advertise that that's where you are, because it's better if we take our time and we feel sure in the core of what we're talking about. So that way, when we invite people to be among us, or when we're even affirming people who are among us who we may not know, or they may not be out to us at this time, that the core of what we think is that they are truly included, that we're all truly included and wholly included in the fullness of who we are. And we can bring all pieces of ourselves to the table, and that we don't have to fracture ourselves in order to belong, right? That's the biggest thing that you can do. And that includes making sure that the congregation is on board, right? I mean, it's always really powerful, obviously, and necessary for the ministry personnel to be behind this, right? But the congregation is just as important. And so making sure that if you need to do more internal education or have more conversations, that's really vital too, because the person who is next to us, who's going to say, welcome this Sunday morning, or, who's going to be with them in a in a breakout room on a Zoom, church service or something. That person is what is going to represent the church to them in that moment. So they might not be a leader, quote unquote, but to make sure that you've given enough tools as you can and as faithful as you can to the congregation so that we can all be affirming leaders in that space. And I heard this definition of the difference between affirming and welcoming from Betsy Young in Calgary, who led our sort of grassroots affirming network for a long, long time at Wild Rose United Church. And, she talked about the difference between welcome and affirming is when we say welcome, we're still speaking from a position of dominance because we're saying you're welcome here. Like somehow we own the space, right? It still has sort of some power to it. And it also implies that we cannot welcome because we get to choose. The word affirm is different because affirming is basically, if you tell me who you are, my job is to say, yes, I see you. It takes us and our egos and whatever baggage we have and whatever we may still be struggling with out of the equation, because my job in that moment is to say, I see you and I believe who you are. You tell me who you are, I believe you and I affirm you in the fullness. I may not always understand you. I may not be able to relate on a really deep level. I may still be struggling with my own journey around some things. But affirming means that we actually, take ourselves out of being sort of thinking that we're godlike and that we have the ability to decide who's in and out. And we're more Christ-like in saying everybody belongs. And to me, that's a really powerful difference between affirming and welcoming. And that's the thing when people say, well, we're already welcoming. And I say, you probably are. People can probably come and be among you and be co-located among you and feel like you've said that they can be in the space. But being affirmed in a space is different than being welcome. And so it's another evolution beyond that welcome. Somebody asked, how do we speak and show our welcome and acceptance? I've said a lot of the things already. Show up to rallies and movements, get out in the community, be movers and shakers. I mean, this is one of the things that I love about, I didn't grow up in the United Church, but I've been a part of it for about 12 years now and doing this sort of work for about 11 years. And I tell you what, United Church is like out there, right? I mean, we're not afraid to get involved in stuff. And so use that, really social justice heart and spirit of the United Church, and know that people see that and that it matters to them. And always assume that you can never assume, right? Sometimes, I've gone to affirming churches and I've talked to them and they have amazing programs happening. They talk to me about some of the stuff and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have so much to learn from you. And I'm hearing all this stuff. I go on their website, I don't see any of this stuff advertised. I go on their social media, it's not there. And they're like, well, we're not sure why only 3 people are coming. Well, that might be part of it, right? So don't be shy. Don't ever think, no matter how long you've been affirming, no matter how long you've been established in a certain city, no matter how deeply connected your congregation is in that community, don't assume that people know who you are or what you stand for. I lived in Calgary for a long time before I even ever heard of an affirming church or ever even thought it existed. When I first came out, I thought I had 2 options of where I could go to church. I could go to Toronto to Metropolitan Community Church, or I could go to San Francisco to a different Metropolitan Community Church. That's the only churches that I knew about because the one in Toronto obviously was instrumental in getting gay marriage passed federally in Canada. So I was in Calgary for 10 years before that, right? And I had no idea that one church existed or that it was even a thing, right? And I talk to people all the time. This is a radical act. And one day we hope and we pray that it's not going to be revolutionary. It's going to be so everyday and so ordinary that everyone can belong without having to fracture themselves. It just isn't the case right now. So just know that people don't know. And that's okay. And so it gives us the surety that we can preach what we practice and we don't have to feel shy about it. I think the last thing that I wanted to share is, why does this matter? We know that we can name a lot of different things about, equality and people belonging and that sort of thing. At the end of the day, when I look at the life of Jesus and, when I look at what has really made me hang in there in the times when I don't want a religious organization on my business card, when I feel like, there hasn't really, when I wonder whether being involved in religious institutions does more harm than good, because the really loud religious voices that I hear that are really hateful and really violent. And sometimes I've wanted to say, I can't be a part of it anymore, not in this way, because I don't want to be a part of the harm. And yet at the same time, the thing that has kept me alive and that has gotten me to this space right now is that I've never allowed, or I don't allow anymore, other people to define whether I have access to a relationship with God or to knowing how sacred I am. And so I think what I would say is a deep piece of why this matters is because this connects to who we all are, right? I mean, what we want at the core of our being is to belong, to know we're not alone, to know that this life full of mystery and hardship and questions and mistakes, that we're not alone in it. And the thing around affirming is it says you're not alone. And it says we have and we take seriously the things that get in our way that make us wonder whether people actually do belong or not. And we try to remove those barriers in our hearts, in our minds, in our buildings, in our theology to make sure that people know that they're not alone. And it seems like such a really simple thing to say, but it also means that we're claiming our space in the religious landscape to say, whatever the other voices are that say who gets to belong, say who's in or out, say who's going to hell and all those sorts of things, that we can do what Jesus often did, which was say, you've been told that this thing is true, but I'm here to tell you there's another way. And you're here to tell people that there's another way to be. And that's why it matters, because a truly affirming community gives that sense of groundedness and meaning to all of us, regardless of our identities, and grounds us in that we're not afraid to pay it forward, or that we have to claim our space and make sure that no one's going to take it, because we realize that there's always space for more. If we have a moment, I'd love to take any questions that you might have.
So friends, if you've got questions, you can either put them in the chat, or I'll try to see you wave, or you can unmute yourself and ask questions. I would, two pieces I wanted just to share. One is, I think there's something very valuable in understanding more about the intersectionality, because I think that that helps people who are saying, oh, why are we just focusing on LGBTQ? So you might, if you could talk a little more about that. And the other one is, one of the things we say when we're talking about this affirming, welcoming difference is it's a difference between saying, make yourself at home, and this is your home.
Right. Right.
So other questions, and let me see if I can make this, I need to see y'all. There you go, now I can see y'all.
So yeah, Bill.
Go, so wave if you want. Go ahead, Pam, sorry.
I'll speak a little bit to the, while people might have some questions, I'll speak a little bit to the intersectionality piece. And I think what can sometimes be a red herring, or a little bit of a detour, is for people to say, well, why this topic, right? There's lots of other need, and it's true, there's so much need, right? This is usually one of the biggest theological barriers that we have. So this sort of serves as a litmus test, right? If we're willing to face into what do we really think about belonging around a group of people that the Bible specifically has been used to attack and exclude strategically with so many resources and so much money and so much time spent on exclusion. If we're able to respond to that, religious attack requires a religious response. And so if we're able to respond to that as people of faith, it opens us up so much more to the possibility of us, if there are other things that are challenging always, because we're humans, are challenging for us to wrap our minds around, it actually creates more of a environment for those things to be addressed. It's statistically proven that affirming communities who take it seriously and continue on their journeys have better communication as a congregation, are healthier in all parts of the life and the work of the church. It doesn't mean there's never conflict. It doesn't mean there's never anything challenging that happens, but it just means overall, if we're able to face into this, we actually are able to look at an intersectionality with a different kind of mind frame. Does that help a little bit?
It does. I just like the intersectionality, the idea that there's overlapping reasons why one might not be included, whether it's ethnic origin, gender-based issues, or issues around poverty. Like, there's various different ways that someone can not feel welcomed or feel out of.
That's right. Yeah, and like I said, exactly, Bill, that's great. Like I said, the affirming stance has, so many people have said, like, I am fill in the blank, divorced, Buddhist, or all these different things that they feel like maybe I don't belong here. And they're like, if this is what they think about folks who've been traditionally marginalized by religion, then I will fit in too, right? So we often find that at affirming faith communities that more and more people come, not even because they have a queer identity, but because they know, okay, I am welcome and I can be affirmed as well in the pieces of who I am.
Patricia was asking about places we can find symbols and resources, flags, banners, etc., and etc. Having make your own or help, or just help with exclamation mark.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Affirm United has a lot more resources now. And so actually, if you go to their website, I think under shop, you can get the Affirm United logo on a lot of different materials now. They used to just have, I think, stickers, and sometimes t-shirts you'd have to go to the actual conference, but they do have a shop online now. And yeah, feel free to reach out, if you might have a local flag shop or something like that, or, it's really easy to get buttons made. You can go online and get 1,000 buttons, at a bulk price that are really, really affordable. You can have them design it for you and get a rainbow button, or you can, send them your logo and they'll put it in there. And feel free to, be creative and design your own thing. There's a lot of people who get, their own banners made. Sometimes people for Pride, everybody chips in and they'll, go to a local t-shirt company and get all t-shirts, together and stuff like that. So, from United, merchandise, from what they have on there. Sometimes it is hard in person to find a lot of rainbowy stuff. So I get that. So most of the stuff that you're going to find is probably going to be online.
Yeah, we have a place in Vancouver called the Little Sister, and the Little Sister you can find big rainbow flag, and a lot of stuff from Rainbow that you can get it in there in reasonable prices.
And that's where Max got the present rainbow candles. And our hope is once we're allowed to meet our youth group, we'll be making rainbow candles. And maybe, Patricia, the youth group could make a rainbow candle for each of the 5 cluster churches. So, because we've got lots of tail ends of white candles, we melt them down, use wax crayons, and we make a layered candle. So I'll put it on the list. Is there other thoughts or questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead then.
Right. So often when, guys, can I have quiet just for a second? Often when congregations or other groups have the affirming question, do we affirm or not, et cetera, that very conversation ends up being wounding to LGBTQ folks. I'm sitting here while you're debating my humanity kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't want that to happen. And, we have in the Bible where God brings all these disparate people together and says, you're a church now. Do you have any thoughts about how to have that conversation in a way that is less wounding to LGBTQ folks and yet doesn't simply, kick everybody out the door if they don't agree with the majority? I realize there may not be a good answer to that question, but.
Right. That's a really, really good question, Tim. And the first thing that I would say is to be open as leadership that's a reality, to understand, like, we know that by having these conversations and debating this in a way like that, it does seem like kind of a ridiculous thing sometimes, right? It's kind of like saying, should we allow redheads, and I think naming that and saying, we want this process to be really healing and helpful for everybody. And we also have to assume and remind people of this, that we don't know the reality of the person next to us. There are people who are, undercover in their churches, even if they've been there for a long time, because they don't know what people think about them and they want to remain in community. And so remembering to be very tender when we're having conversations, because we don't know, no matter the relationship status or the outward appearance of anybody around us, who they are, right? They may not have chosen yet to tell us who they are. And so to know, like, having a side conversation, like, do you believe this, may not be a side conversation, right? And so we really want to respect that. Yes, you want to have places where people can say, I'm struggling with this and all that kind of stuff. And to also be really transparent about what your different sessions are going to be so that people can opt in or out, right? Say, this is a session, this is a time. If you have these tough questions, if you have these questions that you feel like I can't ask, whatever, maybe that's not the time when queer folks would want to attend, right? So just being really transparent, this is what we're setting up this specific thing for, right? And then that's when you would have a professional, somebody like me or somebody else, to come in and talk about those questions, because that's my work, right? And I'm not going to take it on as emotionally or as personally as somebody who's a part of that community, and nor should they need to, right? So again, it's not about ostracizing people who have hard questions, but just saying the reality is we want to do this as loving as possible. The reality is we understand we should not have to have this conversation. We know that this is really difficult for queer folks to even feel debated. At the same time, the reality is we're not at a place in our society or as a religion yet where it does us any good to not have the conversation, because we have to provide an antidote, and we can't do that by being silent. And so just being as transparent about that this is a complicated thing, telling people to take care of themselves, don't attend things or feel like you have to. You might ask some people to share their personal story. They may really want to and feel really excited about that, but they may not. They may say, maybe not right now. So just being intentional and transparent about what happens at each session, making sure that a professional, community person or, speaker or whatever is the one that deals with sort of the really hard things. And if you have to reevaluate what that looks like along the road, then that's okay. But I mean, the fact that you're being thoughtful about it is a very hopeful thing. And so to just keep that kind of stuff in mind as you journey through it.
That's really helpful. I love those ideas. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
So the best laid plans and schedules on an agenda is always open to flexibility, right? So we've got an hour and 20 minutes now, and I think thank you very much, Pam. But we were thinking of breaking into small groups, but I'm not entirely sure we need to do that. What I'd like to throw out there, unless there's other questions, is from what you've heard Pam speak about, what have you captured that you think we could do right away? So I'll start by saying one of the pieces, I went and looked at our website and our wedding policy, and you find it there. And indeed, we do say that, we're open to same gender marriages, right? Weddings. But you have to dig through the text to find it. There's nothing there that's it's clear. So I'm thinking we need to put a symbol, the rainbow symbol there, probably the one that I've got in the heart and other places, so that people can see, okay, this is going to be here. And it made me look at our website a little bit and say, does somebody have to know enough about us to be able to find what they're looking for? So I'm going to look at our website and maybe change some things up so someone sees it on the front door, so to speak. So that's where I was going. Patricia.
I absolutely agree with you, Bill. We have our affirming story in there, and the fact that we have a friend of Affirm from 1980s who, Arlene, who got us going on this. We have a full story, and unless you drill down there and you can't even find our celebration that happened in 2018, it's buried. So that was exactly my thought, was we need to be right up there on that website, able to link in there and show people what we have and where we've come from and where we're headed. Pam, I've loved this. You are awesome. I'll mute myself now.
Thank you.
So even to the point that, okay, at the top of our website, we say our affirming ministry. It's one of the pull down things. But we can't assume that everybody knows what affirming ministry means, right?
Another thing that I noticed when we were attending in Kamloops, that the minister was wearing a stole that was a rainbow stole. And that visual part from the member and from the people that were attending the service was very intense to see these men wearing a stole that resembled the bride. And I think that is a good idea, in terms that become visible.
And I look good in rainbow. Is there other thoughts or questions or wonderings, friends? I have to stand up so I can see all your pretty pictures.
Can I ask if there's anyone else from my two congregations that has thoughts about what we might do in particular?
I think only Patricia's here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we had someone else, but they left. Okay.
Oh, Tim, we have always talked about, our committee has talked about painting rainbows along the pillars that are on the front. Maybe this is the year for us to do that through the summer when it's dry.
Yes.
One of the pieces that jumped out at me was this thinking long term. That your story about someone 7 years later, and so in fact, there's layers of hesitation and fear and that is out there that has to be peeled back very slowly, right? And the story of someone coming to the door and saying, no, can't do it, right? It's just remarkable to take hold of, because we're doing this for the long term. And it's like planting a tree, right? It's not for today. It might be for 6 years from now. It might be some young fella who's 12, doesn't understand where his journey yet, but he might be 24 when he remembers, oh yeah, but that church had rainbow flags, right? So they might like just the act of compassion just by being public. What might we do? Patricia said, paint the pillars in front of Gladwin with rainbows. That's awesome. What might we also do? I said change the website. Go ahead, Patricia.
Well, something I had been thinking about earlier is, and Pam just underscores it, we have a very strong pride parade, and well, COVID-y times has changed things, but you know, the walk and that wonderful gathering we had at Jubilee Park a couple of summers ago. Can we somehow have approach the committee that organizes that? Could we be part of that planning? Could, you know, rather than what we have done before, which is, well, we asked if we could be a booth, have a table, you know, and I mean, it was pretty emotional talking to people who said, this is the first time we've had a church in this space.
Yeah.
So, but how can we be part of helping them, helping be part of the planning? I'm sorry, I'm babbling. There you go.
That's a great idea. And actually, Brian Gross from the Impact Society, who was primarily involved in making the Pride in the Park go. It's their organization that's been doing the homeless support group out of the basement of our church. So we've established a pretty good relationship with him now. So he would actually dance a happy dance if we said we want to be involved in organizing it. I guarantee it.
Am I on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I remember a few years ago when we were at that Pride Parade and we had a table there and stuff, overhearing people outside saying, oh, there's a church here. They're probably here to do something to us or whatever and stuff, right? So they didn't even know why we were there. So, you know, that's another thing.
Yeah. Indeed, and once you broke into conversations with people, how much it meant to them that there was a church that was supportive. The other piece Pam mentioned that I clicked for me. It clicked for me a moment ago, and now it's gone.
Can you recognize Rose?
Oh, Rose, you're trying to get in there? Certainly.
Yeah, I was thinking of, you know how on July the 1st for Canada Day, we all have little flags. And I know Ken and I always put Canada Day flags out in front of our house. But I think it might be an idea for all the cluster congregations to get a bulk order of these flags and give them to our members and say, if you are truly trying to tell people we are an affirming church, I think the statement of putting it in front of your own home, and I know our neighborhood knows Ken and I are part of the United Church, it would say, we believe in this and we are very prideful of putting it and telling other people we believe in this. So it might, and I think that if it was always sitting somewhere in your house, I know every time I pass the little jar that has the Canadian flag in it downstairs, I think about it. So it might be a small gesture, but it might be a step towards making sure the community knows that we are supportive. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you. And in fact, we might be able to do something and get the, you know, the United Church, like the church logo or our names on the flag too. Go ahead, Marcia.
I'm just thinking, well, Rose's idea is great too, is how the UCW can work towards promotion as well. We do our Facebook posts, and we've been doing a lot of education sessions on Canadian women, and just being more mindful and including a lot more support would be a good way too.
Yes.
I remembered I remembered what I was going to say. I have encountered folks who have no idea that the United Church of Canada took action in 1988, right? That we accepted gays and homosexuals, lesbians as full members, and therefore they were permitted to be called into full-time ministry. That they just, you know, a young person who was born after 1988 and they don't know, right? Because inside the church, of course, everybody knows that we're like that. Remember that, you know, the big front page headlines in 1988? So shouldn't everybody know? But they don't, right? And in the same way, like what we're doing now, people don't know. So, Tim, were you trying to jump in?
Oh, yes, thank you. A couple of years ago, when the UFV event was in person, I mean, yes, Tracy and I did a presentation, but we also had a bunch of us with a booth at that. And if they make it virtual again, I'm wondering if there's a way for our cluster as a whole to have a presence at that event, somehow virtually.
Yeah. To some sort of hosting some sort of piece of it in a greater way than what you guys did.
Yeah, to say the entire, you know, regional cluster is part of this. Yeah.
Right. So we're at 11:30. How are people doing? You have more questions or ideas or thoughts or worries? Bill, you're sitting there in Calgary. You're allowed to jump in if you like. Did you have a thought or something you wanted to add?
I was just thinking, I'm looking at your chapel there, your background, and you got a couple of streamers hanging down. That perhaps maybe there could be a flag painted on the wall, or a flag hanging there rather than just a little strip hanging behind you.
Oh, rather than the banners?
Yeah.
We have done that in the past, and the one here we made sure, but yeah, we have done that in the past. So
Yeah. Okay. I just thought it might be kind of nice if I wasn't a non-member or wasn't gay, and I walked into your church and I saw that on the wall, I'd say, why do they have a beautiful painted of a rainbow there, or maybe a flag or something, and a hand holding it or something? You know, they might ask a question. What is that about? You know.
Max was at Little Sisters just a couple weeks ago when he bought us a new flag. I'm going to turn the camera around so you can all see it, because none of you see it online. Let's see if I can pick it up. Oh, it's too dark. Oh, hang on. No, you can barely see it past the last window. So with our idea being that that's what people see as they walk in.
Okay.
And we have not only the flag, we have a picture of the Trinity Memorial Affirming Committee, that were the people that essentially brought us today to become affirming. And we are going to have another picture of the current member of the Affirming Ministry. And we had the diploma that we got it when we became affirming. So that is become part of our pie, public, explicit, and intentional. So when people come to the sanctuary, the first thing that they will see will be the rainbow flag. The first thing, and also they can go there and read everything that is framed and the picture, and recognize the members of the congregation that have been participants of the whole process. And here in the front, you see a flag of the heart. The heart, you know what I mean? That is all the color of affirming, all the colors of the rainbow. So we are trying to become more explicit. Outside, we have a big banner that it have the affirming crest and that everyone is welcome in this church. So we are trying to become more open to the congregation and to the public, so the public become aware who we are, you know. So that's, I think, it's a step by step by step that we are trying to do in order to become more public exposure, you know, so people can see us and they can know and they can feel welcome when they come.
Thanks, Max.
David.
Well, I'm part of the older generation here, and it was my privilege to join Max and others on our affirming committee. And as soon as we became affirming, I got off the committee. But I've been both at the booth and the university gathering that were talked about. And I think for many of us, what you have said, Pam, has been very affirming in terms of our journey. And I was really struck and am left with your quiet little comment at the end, there is another way. I think for many of us, 80 plus, the conversations that we have need to include that phrase. And probably that's what we would take from this time together, and we would pledge wherever the opportunity arises to say very quietly, well, you know, there is a better way, another way that's a better way. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate that.
I took copious notes myself. Yes, Tim, this is being, this is on YouTube today, so I love the line, Pam, you lifted up saying, we practice what we preach already, but we don't necessarily preach what we practice. So we work hard to be welcoming as much as we can. We stumble along and do what we can, but we're actually not telling everybody that we are. So what a remarkable insight. And we're shy about it, right? So friends, I wonder if there's any other questions, or if Pam, do you want to give us sort of a last hurrah, inspirational, here's a wrap up, some comments?
Happy to. Well, I first want to say thank you, folks, and thanks for your grace with my technology issues as we're out at the cabin here. So thank you for bearing with me on that. You have a very thoughtful group here, and that gives me, that makes me really joyous, because this work is my professional work, but it's also very personal work, and not just for me, but I'm lucky enough to hold hundreds of stories inside of me of what people have told me through the past 10 or 11 years of doing this work so intentionally. And, it's wild to me still that I could have easily ended up in a denomination or in a place in my life where I still didn't know that you existed, right? And so I think it makes me really hopeful to know that you all are committed to continuing to make your sanctuaries and your spaces true sanctuaries and true spaces where people know that they can belong. And I think many of the things that y'all have shared around, looking at your websites and looking at all of those things. I mean, like I said, sometimes United Church people are too shy, right? You got to have a little of that evangelical spirit, not in the converting people, but in terms of letting them know that there is good news, because there is, right? And again, a piece of what was, even the first affirming church I went to, there was a little like 2x2 rainbow flag sticker on their sign. And somebody said that they thought that they saw a rainbow sticker at some point on their sign. And that's the only reason that they knew that maybe I could look at this church, right? So every little bit matters. And I wanted to add really quick, like just a logistical thing. While you're still worshiping online, and however you might do online things in the future and all that kind of stuff, it's never a bad idea when you're on Zoom to like have a little flag in the background, or, a little one on your desk or something, or, I always try to have like some sort of a queer book on my bookshelf that people can see, or, just another little, I've had practitioners and, mental health people be like, how can we let people know, when they first are starting to talk to us, like, and I'm like, have something in the background in your Zoom background that shows that, right? So there are other ways too in this digital world that we can give those cues to people about who we are. But yeah, just know that it matters, and it makes me, gives me a lot of encouragement to know that y'all are working together on these things, and that you're already exempling and embodying that you all are not alone, because this can be hard work and this can be isolating work. Because, there are, I think, 270 Affirming Ministries in Canada, and, there are over 3,000 ministries, right? So we're getting there. But for being around for 3 decades, it's not enough yet. So I think, just know that you are a beacon and you're an example, and you're not only, learning about what else you can do, but you're an example to other people of what's possible. So don't be afraid to get out there, get on committees, get booths out there, all that kind of stuff, because you have good news. You have really good news to share, and you have lots of people who are waiting to hear it. And like, again, it might be, it's the long game, but it's definitely the only path that we have in terms of, creating a life of meaning where everybody can feel like they can be a part of it. So thank you so much for this. This is always a fun conversation for me, and you have really great, thoughtful questions and comments. And I hope I didn't take too much of your breakout time together, but hopefully, in the future, you can have another chat about, other action things that you might want to do in the near future. Pride Month is coming up and all that kind of stuff. So you'll have lots of really, exciting chances to get involved and do some things.
Thank you so much, Pam. It's been quite inspiring, and as everybody's response has been as well. Just before we wrap it up, I just wanted to give people an opportunity. Is there one more burning question you really wanted to ask, or something you just had to say? I don't see anybody panicking on the screen, so I wonder, Tim, if you could just send us off with a blessing.
Sure, just give me a second. Let us pray. We are not alone. We have good news. There is another way. All of this is indeed good news, God, and there are indeed people who are hungering and thirsting to hear it. And so we give you thanks for Pam's ministry of witness and encouragement and education. We give you thanks for the ministry of leadership and visioning of all of our affirming members. We ask that you continue to gift us and fill us with your spirits as we go into your future with hope and joy. Amen.
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 So Pam, blessings on your upcoming wedding in 1 month. May you have a beautiful, joyful day of it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, folks. Nice to see you, Max and Alan and Bill again. And hope you come and visit your cluster at some point in person. So,
That'd be wonderful.
okay, take care, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye, friends. Thank you for joining us, everyone.